We are always told that true love is when it's easy, when the pieces fall into place by themselves and conversations flow effortlessly. But I am 81 now, and I know this is the biggest lie we believe in our youth. The strongest things in my life were born not from joy, but from moments when we were both the worst versions of ourselves and almost became enemies. Let me tell you how we survived where others parted ways and why this scar became our strongest support. Sometimes I quietly think to myself, Jeff, you're 81 and you're still trying to figure out simple things. In youth, it seems that love is when it's easy, when conversation flows on its own, when laughter requires no effort, when there's no need to explain why you are the way you are. It seems that the right person is the one beside whom there is no friction, as if everything should fall into place naturally, without roughness, pauses, or awkwardness. I thought the same. In my early 20s, I believed that true feelings meant the absence of difficulty, that if things got hard, something was wrong, that I had made a mistake, that somewhere there was another option, simpler, clearer, without that tightness in the chest. Over the years, I realized ease is a wonderful beginning, but not always a sign of depth. What matters more is with whom it was hard, but not destructive, with whom tension did not turn into humiliation, with whom silence was not punishment, with whom discomfort did not become a weapon. I am not talking about heroism, nor about enduring pain for a noble purpose. No. I have seen enough people of my generation who hid their fear of loneliness behind words about endurance. That's not it. This is not about suffering as a virtue. I am talking about something else, about those periods when life suddenly feels cramped because of money, work, fatigue, immaturity, and two people don't know how to behave toward each other. About the moments when you look at the person you share your days with and don't recognize the easy, carefree conversationalist from the beginning. That is where something is decided, not in kisses, not in promises, not in the words forever, but in small, almost imperceptible choices, choosing not to hurt when you could, choosing not to leave when allowed, choosing not to say too much, even when it begs to be said. What we endured together was not beautiful, and it was not always fair. But over time I saw shared hardship creates a bond no less than happiness, sometimes even stronger, because happiness is easy to share when it's abundant. Scarcity, less so. You may still think that the main thing is to find someone with whom everything will be smooth. I thought the same, and I won't say it was foolish, it was youth. Youth always believes a little in continuous ease. Life, however, is long, longer than it seems at 20, and in this long span, ease doesn't disappear completely, but it stops being the measure. The measure becomes something else. Whether what could have broken you didn't. Whether you stayed together not because there was no way out, but because the way out seemed worse than the hardships. I am not drawing conclusions from this. I am simply sharing what I see now, when most of the details have faded, but the feelings have not. And if something in my life has proven truly strong, it was born not only from joy, but from those periods when we were both not the best versions of ourselves, and yet did not become enemies. I was 28. We had been married a little over 2 years. At that age, it seems you are already grown up. But in reality, you are just learning not to resent the world for not meeting your expectations. I worked at a small engineering company in Ohio. The job was stable, not brilliant, but enough. We had just taken out a small mortgage. Back then, it felt like a step into real life. I remember the feeling of pride mixed with fear. Now, I was responsible not only for myself. Then the company downsized, not because of a mistake I made, not because of someone's betrayal, just the market shifted. One day, I was called in and told that starting next month, I was no longer needed. I walked out with my papers in hand and a strange emptiness inside, as if the sound inside me had been turned off. The first weeks I held myself together, sent out resumes, called acquaintances, pretended it was temporary, but time passed and responses were short and polite. Money began to dwindle. Our daughter was born. She was only 6 months old then, and suddenly everything that seemed solid became fragile. She was tired. I could see it in her eyes. No reproaches, no drama, just quiet exhaustion. She cared for the baby, economized on small things, did evening translation work on the side. I began to doubt myself, and her too, though now I am ashamed to admit it. Tension grew between us, not loud, not dramatic, but conversations became shorter. I reacted more sharply to remarks. She was silent longer than before. We were both young and didn't know how to handle fear properly. One evening, I caught myself thinking I could leave and no one would judge me. In those years in America, divorce no longer shocked anyone. Saying, "We are too different" or "Our personalities don't match" was easy. I even imagined starting over somewhere else, without the daily feeling of failure, without her quiet exhaustion beside me. This thought was not loud. It didn't sound like betrayal. It sounded like an escape toward relief. And that's what scared me. I didn't stay then because of promises, nor because of duty to the child, not out of fear of judgment. To be honest, at that time, I felt I was the main victim of circumstances, and that was the most dangerous feeling. I stayed for another reason. I suddenly realized, if I leave now, I will be running not from hardship, but from a part of myself, from the version of me still forming, from responsibility, not as a burden, but as a way to grow up. I saw that she was also struggling, and that she didn't demean me because of my failure. She didn't reproach, didn't compare, didn't demand an immediate resolution. She simply lived beside me in the same fear, but without sharp moves. We didn't sit down then for a long, honest dialogue. There were no dramatic reconciliations. There was something else. I started taking temporary work, any work. She allowed me not to be a hero. I allowed her sometimes to be tired without explanations. We irritated each other. We stumbled over words. There were days when I felt the crack could become a chasm. But something held. Not a lofty feeling, not romantic heat, but a simple awareness. Running now would break more than staying. It would break trust, which had not yet even taken root properly. 6 months later, I found a new job. Not better, not worse, just different. Life leveled out enough for us to breathe, and from the outside, it could have seemed like a normal rough patch of a young family. But inside, something changed. I stopped looking at our bond as something guaranteed. It became fragile, and therefore real. I didn't call it anything big at the time. I just understood for the first time that staying sometimes is harder than leaving, and that this choice doesn't make you a hero. It simply changes the direction of your adulthood. I didn't know then that this was only the first time we learned to endure together, but it was there, in that awkward, ugly period, that something arose which would echo in our lives many times later. Many years passed. I was no longer the young man afraid of every rejection letter. We were a little over 40 when life changed direction again. This time, not because of job loss. On the contrary, I got a promotion, more responsibility, more travel, more hours away from home. It seemed like success, what I had strived for after that early failure. But success can also be a trial. I began living in a constant state of busyness. Conversations shrank to to-do lists. We looked less into each other's eyes and more at the clock. One evening, she said calmly, without accusation, "Sometimes I feel like we live next to each other, but not together." And there was no drama in these words, only fatigue. I caught myself thinking, maybe we are staying together only because of the past, because of those years of scarcity, the first trial, our daughter, our shared efforts. Perhaps it is not the present that binds us, but inertia. This thought was more painful than any argument, because if you are together only because of the past, the future becomes a formality. And this is where what we endured earlier echoed. At 28, I stayed not because of romance, but because I felt that running away would destroy something. Now, for the first time, I thought, staying is not just about not leaving, it is about changing the way you exist beside someone. I began declining some trips, not out of heroism. I was afraid of losing position, status, income. But I remembered how easily things once tipped. And I did not want it to tip now because of my blindness. We relearned how to talk. No big scenes, more awkward pauses, honest confessions of irritation, jealousy toward work, fear of growing old unnoticed. It was not a romantic return to the beginning. It was quieter, like acknowledging we are already different and the bond must change too. But not all consequences were bright. When we were about 50, I began noticing that she forgot small things more often. At first, it seemed funny, then alarming. Doctors didn't rush with diagnoses. Stress, overwork, age. We both pretended that was enough. One day she didn't recognize an acquaintance, and I saw fear in her eyes, not for the acquaintance, but for herself. That's when I felt something tighten inside me. Now I had to be the support, without loud promises, simply be. There were days when she repeated the same question several times, and days when she was upset with me for things I hadn't done. Fatigue accumulated. Sometimes I left conversations earlier than I should. Sometimes I raised my voice, and then I regretted it. In those moments, I thought again, had we confused love with the habit of staying? Perhaps I stay because otherwise I don't know how. Because our lives are so intertwined that unraveling them is scarier than enduring? These questions were not betrayal, they were fatigue, and yet, in the hardest times, something unexpected appeared. Sometimes she would suddenly take my hand, as in our youth, and look at me with the same gentleness. She might forget where she put her keys, but she didn't forget that I am hers. And there was something strange and strong in that. Her memory failed in details, but the feeling remained. There was a day when I broke, quietly. I sat and suddenly felt I could no longer be the steadfast one, that I was tired of being the one who remembers for two. And then she, noticing my state, said, "You were always there." She couldn't recount what exactly I did yesterday, but she knew I was there, and that saved me more than any clear memories. Our endurance did not make us saints. We argued. I was angry at illness. and sometimes at her, even knowing it was unfair. There were moments I wished I could go back in time to that youth when the biggest problem was the mortgage. But time doesn't go back. It only adds layer upon layer, and amidst all this, fatigue, doubts, brief joys, repeated questions, I began to understand what is endured together becomes like an invisible foundation. You may doubt your feelings, confuse them with habit, get angry, but when the next blow comes, you do not crumble immediately, because once you already didn't crumble. Does this mean we were always right to stay together? I don't know. I still don't know. The question about the boundary between love and habit remains open. It probably has no final answer. But I know one thing. That first trial in youth taught me not to flee from a crack immediately, and because of that, I could stay when the cracks deepened. I am now 81. I no longer keep track of many dates in my head. Sometimes I spend a long time recalling the exact year we traveled somewhere or when our grandson was born. Time mixes details, softens edges, makes everything less sharp. But some things do not fade. I may not remember the precise sequence of events, but I remember the feeling of her hand in mine. I remember sitting beside each other in silence, without needing to prove anything. I remember how, even in those years when memory began to fail her, recognition remained. Not of facts, not of stories, but of connection. And then I realized one simple thing. Love is stronger than memory. Details may vanish, images may dim, even shared stories sometimes become fragmented. But if two people have endured enough together, a depth emerges that is invisible from the outside. It does not shout. It does not need validation. It simply exists. I won't say that everything we endured was necessary. If I could choose, I would remove illness. I would take away those years of confusion. I would leave more ease. I do not romanticize pain. It does not automatically make us better. But I acknowledge this. It is through shared hardship that a depth arose between us that cannot be created by happy days alone. Because happiness is light, and endurance is the roots. And without roots, the light does not last long. Now, when I think of our life, I do not only recall joyful moments. I remember how we did not fall apart when we could have, how we did not become strangers to each other during periods when it would have been easiest, how we allowed each other to be weak, imperfect, tired. Perhaps this is what remains when time takes away the excess. I look at the years we lived without excuses. We were not perfect. I was not always attentive. She was not always patient. We made mistakes, felt hurt, doubted. There were periods when I didn't know if it was still love or just the habit of staying. But now, I see it differently. Even if staying together became a habit, it meant that in the hardest moment, you did not leave. Perhaps that itself was a form of love. Not loud, not youthful, but grown up. Time has taught me something simple. Love is not only what brings joy. It is also what has not broken, what has endured the weight of years, illness, failures, silences. What remains when memory begins to falter? I feel no regret. There is sadness, because life always ends. But in this sadness, there is no bitterness. There is gratitude for someone who stayed, for me who also stayed, and for the fact that even when words are lost, the feeling of we proves stronger than any loss of details. And if you are reading this story now, on the other side of a screen, perhaps at a completely different age and under different circumstances, I do not want to teach you how to live. I just want you not to fear those periods when things become hard. Not every crack is the end. Sometimes it is simply the place where a bond grows deeper. If there is someone beside you with whom it has been difficult, but you have not become enemies, look closely. Perhaps there is more value there than it seems. I have already lived my life. Now it is time for yours. And if in my words you recognize something of your own, then it was not in vain. And if this story resonates with you, support it, like it, subscribe to the channel, not for algorithms, but so that quiet stories like this can reach those who need them. And maybe one day we will talk again.